Welcome to the Lean Out Your Business podcast, a show dedicated to helping entrepreneurs accelerate business growth and simplify success. I'm your host, Krista Grasso, and I've been working with businesses for more than 2 decades to help them lean out and optimize what's working while eliminating anything that's not adding value. So if you are ready to get more time back in your day, more profit in your business, and to do business differently, growing and scaling on your terms, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Lean Out Your Business podcast. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Jessica Sato, and we are going to be talking all about leveraging your business as a vehicle of change and impact. And I know so many of you listening, like me, are very impact driven. We're very passion fueled. And so, how going into the new year, especially, do we balance making that impact, influencing change, doing all of these things that we feel so inspired to do with still leading a really profitable business? So we're going to be talking about all of the good stuff, but first let me tell you a little bit about Jess. So Jess Sato is passionate about helping women globally to use their skills, expertise, and voice to create opportunities for themselves and others. With years of leadership and entrepreneurial experience under her belt, she equips and empowers female founders to incorporate purpose and impact into their business strategy, bring it to life through robust execution planning. Y'all know how much I love planning, and use their big idea and thought leadership as their competitive advantage. In addition, she is also a TEDx speaker coach. So, we're going to be talking a little bit as well about the role that leveraging TEDx can have in your business. So, Jess, I am so excited that you are here. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Me too. All right. So, for all of the listeners out there who are very impact driven, who are very mission driven, right? We want to create some kind of change in the world. We're here for something that feels bigger than just what we do, right?
Mhm.
What are some of the beliefs or some of the limitations that you see get in the way of people ever really realizing that in their work?
Okay, well, I'll just start off with a big one, and that's the Mother Teresa complex. So, this is this belief that, like, in order to do good, you can't make money.
Mm,
And I find a lot of people, they're like, I just want to serve people, I just want to help people. And when you ask them, do you want to make this a business? They're like, but I also really want to run a for-profit business. I'm like, okay, well, those two things can go hand in hand, but you have to be intentional in that process. So I think that's a big one, just recognizing that it's okay to hold both of those pieces in tension with one another. I think the other part too is this question about, am I the right person to do whatever your big idea for change might happen to be, right? So if you're thinking about, some of the biggest problems that we're facing as a community, as a global community, I mean, they're not insignificant. And I think it's really easy to get bogged down in this question of, like, okay, am I the right person? Do I have the right expertise? Who am I to be doing fill in the blank? Those are probably the two biggest things I see. And I guess the other one is just this larger question of, can I actually build a profitable business that does good things in the world, right? We, like, really have been tuned into running profitable businesses. There's a lot of emphasis on money, and there's nothing wrong with money. You have to make money to have a successful business, and it doesn't have to be the end all be all. You can use completely different filters, different approaches to running your business, and still do good in the world. So I think, kind of holding all of those pieces in tension is some of the obstacle that I think most people experience in this space.
Yeah, fun story is my very first consulting business, if we rewind back to the early 2000s, was called From Passion to Profit. And I worked specifically with artists and creatives to take their very passion fueled business and turn it into an actual business, to go from doing things like craft fairs or selling on Etsy and turning it into a full fledged business. And they had so much trouble
Yeah,
with that transition. The idea of making money and making real money felt like they were selling out. It felt
yeah,
like they were losing their identity as an artist. And although that's a very specific niche, I think that translates into so many
for
different
sure.
industries and into so many different kinds of work that people do. Do you see that really
Totally.
commonly?
Totally. I mean, and like you said, I can totally see that clearly, like in the artist community, but it's honestly in every field
Mhm.
because people who are, I'll just say, more impact oriented or maybe mission driven, more purpose driven, there's this bigger question, this sort of like heartbeat that they have that's really about being in service to others, wanting to see some kind of positive change in the world. And I think it can be really hard to hold the tension. I use that terminology a lot, hold the tension, because I really do feel like there is a tension there to run the business. And I think the other thing too is that a lot of us aren't trained in that space either, right? It's like we're trained
Mhm.
to do the work or to follow the passion, but the mechanics of running the business too are really daunting. So it's like when you put those pieces together, people do feel like, okay, well, am I really doing the thing I said I was going to do? Am I doing it the right way? There's just so many questions around that.
Yeah, now there's one more thing that I see that I'm so curious to hear your perspective on, and it is sometimes I hear people say, "I do wanna make a big impact. There's something I wanna do, but first,
Mm,
I need to get my business profitable, and I need to make the money so I can then
mm,
focus on the impact
yeah.
piece." Do you see that as well?
Yeah, so I really see like two schools of thought here. It's in some ways easier, brand new startup, maybe that has some seed money, who can build purpose and all of that mission driven stuff, impact driven stuff in from the get go. That's super awesome. The problem with that is that most of the time, and I think this is generally true, there's that middle period before you're like really successful. That's sort of a nasty sausage making grind. And it's very easy, even with it built in from the beginning, to sort of lose sight of that. I think on the other end, you get exactly what you talked about, which is that people are like, okay, when I hit the target, when I get to this milestone, that's when I'm going to do it. And I would argue that you don't have to be making a ton of money in order to have an impact. There are many, many ways that you can be donating your time, that you could be volunteering, that you could be, even just small percentages of profit or even revenue can go to an organization. There's just so many ways, and maybe we'll talk about some of those. So I sort of think, where it's nice to build it in from the beginning, it's not too late to do it in the aftermath either. And neither of those has to be this huge endeavor, right? You can work those bits and pieces in no matter where you are in the process.
I love that. Like today, I include impact in a lot of what I do. And I know when I had first started in my jewelry business, I didn't feel like I had the time capacity
Mm,
or even the profit to be able to do as much as I wanted. So what I did was I said, what do I have? Well,
yeah.
I have amazing, gorgeous product. So I partnered with Dress for Success and I donated a
Yes.
ton of jewelry to them to be able to help people who are out looking for jobs and building their
Yep.
careers, and it just took some creativity to say, "How can I do what I want?"
Yeah.
Right? Which is to help people feel beautiful and successful and all of these different things, confident, right? But I don't right now feel like I have the time or the profit to play with. I feel like there's always something you can do.
There is. So I'll give you another example. This is something I do in my business. And I have been doing it largely from the beginning. I care a lot about menstrual equity and ending period poverty. And there's a nonprofit that I support. And um, I was looking for practical ways beyond money, right? Money is a really powerful thing, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all, right? And I found that they needed volunteers in local communities to help create the materials, cut, I don't sew, but if I did, that would be an option, like ironing, just putting the pieces together for their sustainable menstrual kits. And I started doing that. I got a group of women who sort of curious about this idea of menstrual equity together. It became a bit of a social hour. We were talking about our businesses, but we were also doing good and closing part of that gap. And so that's, just like what you're saying with Dress for Success, there's always like something that you can do, whether that's just directly volunteering your time. Another way I think that's really common is to take your particular skill set that you're using in your business every day and see where is that needed in your local community, right? Start small
Mhm.
and grow from there.
Absolutely. So, what about some other ways? So, for people who are listening and saying, I am really impact driven, but maybe I haven't been able to dedicate as much to it. How do you balance making money with creating an impact and really having a successful and thriving business?
So, if I were to take a step back away from the tactical for a second, I think some of it is a mindset and a filter, right? So if you know what the impact is that you're trying to create, then you can infuse that in your language, in the way you interact with people. So I think of it as sort of like a how. And one of the ways that you can sort of delineate these two pieces is thinking about the impact as sort of your way of being. This is how I like to show up in the world from a place of service, from a place of, supporting organizations that are near and dear to me, partnering with local organizations that maybe need my support. And then the business side is the what you do. How do you make money? How is that purpose and impact infused into that? So when you use that lens, now all of a sudden you can look at what's before you and say, okay, how can I use my skills? There was a really interesting case study about um, a tech company that noticed that there was a gap with a local organization. They were trying to close, like help create more opportunities for kids to learn coding in like marginalized communities. And they were like, well, we're still a startup. We don't have a lot of money, but what we do have is know-how. And so they partnered, get granted their employees, some benefit to do this, and began to volunteer their hours to close this gap, right? So some of it's just really being smart about how do you leverage your time, your skills. And I always say start with what you know or start with what you're really passionate about. Sometimes they're a little bit separate from each other, but they could be merged.
I love that advice. And that makes me think about, right, why we get into our business. So
Mm,
there's the impact piece of things, but there's also the why. And sometimes those are one and the same, sometimes they're not. If
mhm.
someone feels like they aren't really clear or they've gotten disconnected from their why, or they're no longer sure what it is that they're even passionate about anymore,
Yeah.
do you have anything that you like to share to kind of bring
Mm.
people back to that?
This is such a good question. And I think there's a little bit of an evolution that happens in the life of a business owner, right? So, what we started out passionate about and the reasons why, I don't know that those ever fully go away, but I do think they evolve and mature over time. And sometimes when that happens, and I'll use myself as an example, there feels like there is that disconnect. So, I think number one is just acknowledging that that's an actual possibility. It doesn't say something about you as a business owner. Like you're not failing. That's just part of maturing as a business owner. I think the second piece of that is just pausing and allowing yourself to soul search for a little bit. I think we get so caught up in the doing that we lose sight of like the larger vision sometimes. Even if we're supervision oriented, it's easy to just get caught up in the day to day. And I found that in times where I felt disconnected, it's because I had lost connection with the vision. So pausing, taking some time to really look at what you said you wanted to create and figure out, is that still right? So I said I would use myself as an example. I would say, gosh, maybe a year and a half ago now, I had this very thing. I was looking at the business I had built. By all measures, it was successful. I had set out to do the thing. I did the thing. And yet I kept looking at it thinking, I don't love this. I don't feel like I'm doing everything that I really called to be doing. And so I just paused and I just allowed myself to do some reflection. I, journaled some of the prompts I would give my own clients if I were working with them to do passion. We should be students of our own work many times. And out of that came this realization that I really wanted to work with business owners that were further along in the process and who were really focused on impact driven work. And that's not to say the people I was working with weren't vision oriented or mission oriented, but I just wanted it to be much more specific. And I had to wrestle with that. That didn't come easily, but then once I made the decision, it was like something shifted inside me. And I realized like, oh yeah, okay, this now you're back on track. So I think for most of us it just is the needed pause to reflect and ask yourself some really hard questions and then to be okay making the shift, right? I equate it back to like if you were in the corporate world and you followed the plan that you built for yourself and climbed the ladder and you got there and you're like, ugh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Some of us had to shift, and we did, to entrepreneurship, right? I think it's very much the same process. So, permission to pause, do the work, and then make the shift is what I would say for people who feel disconnected.
I love that advice, and honestly, what you just outlined, I feel like is valuable even if you don't feel
Yeah,
disconnected,
it is.
right? Like, it's like the most valuable thing you could possibly do to keep connected and to keep grounded in what's so important,
Yeah.
and even if you're not making a big shift, but you're making micro shifts to
Mhm.
keep things feeling really good and really aligned, that just seems like such a smart strategy. I love
Yeah.
that.
Well, and that's where for me, like my process is, weekly CEO time. I do quarterly CEO retreats. And that's for that very reason. Because sometimes it is just a little micro shift. And I found, every month or so, the language shifts just a little bit because I become clear. I hear more about like what my clients need. Like I just feel like that's part of the evolution and being okay with sort of that constant shifting, even those little ones, is just part of the process.
Agreed. I literally just got back from doing this last week, which was incredible. I blended some time doing some client work and some getting
Mhm.
together with business associates with dedicated time to myself to
Yeah,
literally pause and reflect and envision and get clear on not just what I want next, but what still feels really aligned and what feels like maybe it's time for
yeah,
some of those shifts. And I
yeah.
just think it's so powerful to do it. So I love that you have that dedicated time that you do
Mhm.
regularly.
So good.
Brilliant. All right. So let's talk about people who are mission driven. They've got that really strong mission. How can they leverage that as more of a competitive advantage
Mm.
or a way to really distinguish themselves?
Oh, okay, I love this question because I feel like part of that Mother Teresa complex I mentioned before is that we keep it quiet. And the reality is people want to buy from people who are doing good things in the world. So if you're never talking about your mission, if you're never talking about how you're using your business to create impact, to help solve some kind of global problem, especially if that's not necessarily part of your day to day, people don't know. And I mean, the data is so insanely clear and it's becoming even clearer. Like people, especially our Gen Zs and millennials, like 80 plus percent of Gen Zs and millennials will choose to work with purpose driven brands over those who are not. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is a no brainer. So, how do we talk about this? And to me, that comes with speaking about it with humility, with authenticity, recognizing that, you may do wrong along the way, and that's okay, right? But we keep transparent in our practices. So yeah, I think a big part of this is, you know, making sure that we actually talk about it. And I usually talk about this in the context of sort of like we have three layers of messaging as business owners. We've got like our top layer, our foundational messaging, which is, this is what we do, this is who we serve, this is how we help people. Level two is where the magic is. And this is your big ideas for the world, what kind of change you really want to see, what you're doing, how you serve others in a really rich, robust way, your values, like all of that nice, meaty stuff. And then the level three is like sort of the fun things about you, like the quirkiness, like the things that make you you. Um, and so I find that most people are not talking about level two messaging. They're mostly talking surface level all the time. This is how I help you. This is how, these are my offers. This is, the transformation you'll get. Those are important. We need to know that. It needs to be clear and concise. But the heartbeat is that level two. So a big part of using your mission as your competitive advantage is to talk about it, to show people what you're doing, to, not just look at, you know, this is the money I donated or these are the hours I volunteered, but what was the impact of that? So I use that example about those menstrual kits. So this group of women came together, we made 114 period kit components, which then went on to support 114 young girls in Brazil, which enabled them to go to school, which enabled them to get jobs, etc., instead of being sequestered or whatever the customs might happen to be. So when you talk about those things, people are like, "Oh, it's naturally magnetizes like, oh, okay, this girl, I'm with her. I may not know that issue, but I care a lot about what she's talking about." People want to support people who are doing that. And it also repels people who they're like, "Yeah, I don't care about that. I don't want to pay extra and, my fees, etc." Okay, that's fine. We're not for each other and that's okay. So I think, talking about it is a really big component and then really demonstrating like I really do mean business when I'm saying this. It's not just like purpose washing, greenwashing, whatever type of washing you want to say. This is something that I authentically believe in. This is how it shows up in my business.
So, for the person who's listening and says, I do have a big mission and I don't think I talk about it enough, or I don't really share it that much, because you're right. I'm literally, as you're talking, I'm thinking of so many different brands and I'm thinking how few of them actually talk
Mhm.
about anything like that.
Yeah.
And so, where do you start? Like, how do
Mm.
you start to infuse some of that into your messaging and start to build some of that into what you share and what you talk about?
So I don't want to be cliche and just say just start, but it is a little bit like that.
Mhm.
I think you can give some context though. And even be honest and say, this is something I'm really passionate about, but I really don't talk about it a lot. If we're talking about a bigger brand, they'll probably take a slightly different approach. But for those solopreneurs, small business owners, people want to see you. That's part of who you are as the leader, the founder of the company. So for solopreneurs, I think a big part of that is giving people a glimpse into your heart and not to be too woo woo or softness here, but I do think people want to see what it is you care about and you can talk about why and what does this look like. And it doesn't, for some people, it may feel like it's coming out of the blue, but that's part of what you can address in the transparency. One of the things I think that gets in the way of doing this is people are worried what other people will think. Will this feel out of sync? Will people think that this is out of left field? Will I say the wrong thing? And, there is a lot of conversation about intention versus impact. And I don't want to mitigate that because they both matter. But I genuinely have found that when people are honest about what they believe, why they believe it, and how that's showing up in their business, people are very forgiving if you make a misstep. Because again, that authenticity is coming forward. So I say start with saying why this is important to you, connect it to a personal story or a story that's impacted people on your team that now we're rallying around the team because this is an issue that's important to them. I think there's a couple of ways that you can approach it, and it doesn't have to be this big huge thing. Just start small and take some of those baby steps.
So, what I love so much about everything that you just shared is you approached it from a very impact driven perspective as opposed from a marketing perspective.
Mhm.
Not that there wasn't a level of marketing
Mhm.
in there. Like, I think it's critical, right? But instead of it being this thing that you should do because you're going to get more followers and you're going to get more, so you should talk about something or find something to talk about, it's more how do you leverage that thing that you're already passionate
Yeah.
about, that mission you already have, and make sure that you're communicating about it and being more transparent about what you're doing in your brand.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, people can see through that. That's why I say
Mhm.
it has got to be authentic. I mean, the minute people sniff out that you're just doing this for marketing or because you're trying to get more clients or whatever, I mean, you're dead in the water in that way. And I mean,
Mhm.
we've seen lots of examples of this, over the last 3, 4, 5 years where companies jump on the bandwagon around a particular cause, but it's all lip service or marginal change, and people are not here for that. Like, we're definitely past the era of like performative kinds of stuff. People want to work with and support businesses and people who are authentic, who genuinely care and really want to be a part of whatever that change happens to be. So yeah, it's not about marketing, even though there is a very strong business case for impact driven businesses. It really has to come from an authentic place.
Absolutely. And that makes me kind of think about the work that you do around TEDx speaking
Mm,
and coaching other people to that. Because what an incredible platform to make an impact and get your
yeah,
message out there.
yeah.
And so, how do you think that being a TEDx speaker or leveraging that platform can really help an impact driven brand?
Oh, good. This is like, there's so much. I mean, the TEDx brand is so visible, and there are very few stages that hold the same level of credibility that TEDx does. And that's because it's got some pretty rigorous guidelines around what can and can't be on the stage. They have a very clear structure that it's not just inspiration rah rah. It's not about teaching something, but it's really about getting people to look at their ideas and bringing people into those ideas and really getting them to think about, like, wow, what if we did whatever that idea happens to be. So I think for people who are impact driven, who are mission driven, it's a really natural platform for increasing visibility, to give them additional credibility markers. Again, not necessarily because you need the credibility or because you're doing that for a business growth perspective, although that might be part of the equation, but because you recognize that this platform has global reach, has deep, deep connections and roots, and is a way to really amplify your thought leadership as an entrepreneur, as a thought leader, as someone who's in an impact driven space. And, inviting people into that process. So for me, that's one of the reasons why I've sort of jumped onto, working with people to do TEDx work over the last 4 years, because I've seen like what it can do to shift the trajectory of a business and the impact that they're making, right? Yeah. Are they making more money? Probably. But what they're really doing is seeing the thing that they wanted to create, that change that they really wanted to create, and where we're seeing that really come to life.
So, tell us about your work. Tell us about how you help people with TEDx speaking, how you
Yeah.
help people to really expand and make the impact they're here to make. Tell us all the things and tell us what's coming up for you that you're excited
Okay.
about.
This is good. I have many thoughts swirling in my head right now. So, from a TEDx perspective, and this is where I start with most of my clients, is really getting clear on what is the big idea, right? So, whether it's for TEDx or for just business growth perspective, understanding what it is that you believe and what is the change that you're really trying to see or create becomes foundational. So I mentioned before, like using the impact that you're trying to engage in as the filter. This is the work of figuring out what is the big idea that I subscribe to. Why is this important? What do I want people to know, feel, and do when we come in contact with that big idea? And then getting them to a place where they can apply for a TED Talk. But that's just the beginning, right? TEDx is a single platform, it's a single way to be visible. But I find that for most people, whether they want to be on the TEDx stage or not, is sort of immaterial, because the work that you do to figure out your big idea becomes that filter. And it allows you to use that big idea to start to shape, what do my offers look like? What do I need to do from a team perspective? Do I have the operational capacity, structure, processes, et cetera, to really make sure, like, wow, everything is in alignment? Is our strategy set up such that we can actually do the thing that we said we want to do? So the work starts. Usually people start with me because they want to do TED, but it grows into, how do we elevate the other parts of the business to be ready for that increased visibility and to make sure that everything is in alignment and completely in sync, so that we're operating from a single belief structure, single value system, etc.
Fantastic. So, where can people find you if they want to check out your work and connect with you?
So I primarily hang out on LinkedIn, and I'm Jess Sato, and or Instagram. But you can get most of my information on my website, which is jessicasato.com.
Excellent. And of course, you will find all those links down below in the show notes. All right. So there's a question I ask everybody, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. And that is, in your business, how do you work smarter, not harder, and keep things lean?
So, if I'm really honest, this has been a very big work in progress for me. I used to kind of be a work hoarder and like want to do all the things myself. But what I've come to find is if I want to have the impact that I really want to have, I have to actually let go of things. So I've really been focusing on what is the stuff that only I can do? Where is my expertise best used? Whether that's client service or, speaking or whatever that might be, and leaving the rest of the work to the team and making sure that the team is doing work that they love, that they feel empowered to, make their own decisions, and getting myself out of that grind of like constantly doing things that I'm not really good at, but I was like forcing myself to do. So that's really the big shift that I've been in, bringing the right team on board to actually help me so that I can do the things that allow me to thrive, for me to stay connected to the vision, and making sure the team is the right fit for all of that.
Brilliant. I love it. So, as we round this out, any final tips for entrepreneurs on how they can leverage their business as a vehicle of change and a vehicle of impact?
I would say just start, take the thing that you're passionate about, and just start. Look at what's going on locally. Even if you have a big global mission, what's happening locally? There is always something in your local area that you can start to bring the pieces together, test out theories, and not in a gross kind of way, obviously, but really bringing what you have to the table and partnering with others, and just start small and then grow from there.
Fantastic. Jess, thank you so much for being here and for joining us on today's episode. For all of you listening, I hope you got as much value out of this conversation as I did. I will see you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you have not yet taken our scalability assessment, I invite you to head to leanoutmethod.com/assessment and take our interactive assessment that's going to help you look at how simple, how sustainable, and how scalable your business currently is. It includes personalized recommendations of where to focus next to get your time back, to increase your impact, increase your profits, and ultimately step into your rich, fulfilled life. And finally, we'd love to see you inside our signature program, Simplify to Scale. You can head to leanoutmethod.com/ops to find all of the details on how we can help you uplevel your operations and get out of the day-to-day of your business.